Next speaker is Ben Wilson from SAMS in Oldham. Ben is going to be talking about the issues of concern relating marine mammals and tidal turbines. Very appropriate, the interaction between the major project and marine mammals, particularly the seals, was a very important element in the licensing of that project. So, I don't know whether you're going to be project specific, but off you go.
Project specific. How about that? Right. I'm just going to start out by thanking my co-authors, Stephen Benjamins and Gordon Hastie. And I'm going to talk about marine mammals and tidal turbines. What are the issues of concern and how are they being resolved? And this is really a kind of signpost talk for other issues, other talks and presentations during this conference and how they fit together. Not so many years ago, a picture like this was primarily aspirational. It was something that would happen eventually. That was usually the preface to this picture. This is where things were going. However, this is not so far away at all. We're on the brink of looking at something like this with a major development in the inner sound. Thank you for the intro in. And to go from this to this, we're going to have a pretty good understanding of how marine fauna are going to interact with these devices in order to provide the confidence for those doing the consenting. Now, marine renewables, as you all know, are not ubiquitous. Tidal energy in particular is not everywhere. It is focused into particular places. So, for example, around headlands, between islands and mainlands, or in passageways, or fjords, or entrances, or sounds, and so on. And these places are also of interest to marine mammals and used by marine mammals. And no matter what their density, they're disproportionately important because they're often on their way as places for the animals on their way to somewhere else. So changes in their use may affect wider areas of distribution, and this sort of thing was discussed a lot yesterday. Also, these are difficult places to work simply because they're so energetic. And so in terms of marine mammals, which is what this talks about, we don't know an awful lot about how marine mammals behave in these areas for primarily logistical reasons, and also because they're small sites relative to the total ranges of marine mammals. So, that said, most marine mammals are protected species no matter what country you're in, and their interactions with tidal turbines are one of the key issues on the consenters table at the moment. So what are the issues? So in terms of things like construction and maintenance, most of it is technologies and activities that have been used in other places and have many parallels to other industrial activities. There's not an awful lot new there, and there's quite a lot of information to go on. However, for operation, they're a very new technology. So there are various issues which range from the probably not so important, could be dealt with fairly easily, issues like chemical pollution from anti-fouling and so on. There's operational noise, which is an interesting issue and it's complex in its nature. And then there's issues like spatial displacement, that we talked about an awful lot in the Annex 4 workshop, avoidance, barrier effects, attraction, and so on. But the big one, and I heard the word showstopper mentioned 3 times yesterday, are collisions. What happens if a marine mammal collides with a tidal turbine of whatever flavour you're talking about? And at this point in time, the issue of marine mammal turbine collisions is primarily theoretical. We don't have an awful lot to go on, and of all the turbines and things that have gone in, probably the one that's been most studied so far is the MCT tidal turbine in Strangford Lough in Northern Ireland. And even then, we cannot say for certainty that marine mammals have not collided with this turbine, though we have good data. Harold Sparling is due to talk tomorrow about the research that's gone on and the adventures they've had. And as I see it, those issues and so there's studying individual turbines, but there's also been an awful lot of studies, research studies, trying to get at the problem from different angles. And as I see it, those studies fall into 5 areas. So the first one are which species are at risk and how many. Second one is what is the probability of a strike actually occurring versus any of the other behaviourally modified interactions. Third one is, do collisions actually occur at all? Fourth, if a collision happens, so what? Who cares? What are the consequences of that happening? So does an animal simply swim away with a bruise and a story to tell? Is it stunned or is it mortally wounded? And the fifth one is, are there any mitigation options? Can we do something about it to fix the problem, should there be one? So in terms of which species are at risk and how many, at the EMO conference last time in Orkney a couple of years ago, most of the people involved in marine mammal science, and birds for that matter, were involved in pre-site consenting surveys looking at animal distribution and abundance in their sites, and there's been a huge amount of activity in that regard to work out what species, not necessarily baseline, but information collected for characterization of sites. Simultaneously with that, there's been development of new technologies or other technologies that are standard and off the shelf, but applied and adapted for use in these kinds of habitats. Stephen Benjamin's around can talk about some of the drifting methods we've been working on. And well, we've just been wowed by Brian Pelagi's talk. This is his group's spider for the North America. It's now been, I'm now wowed by their latest. There should be a NASA sticker on this as they put people on the moon. So there's new technologies applied to these sites to get an idea of when animals spatially are there and temporally are there, but also where are they in 3D. So there's been studies to look at high-resolution telemetry to understand where animals are in the water column relative to turbines. And also Jonathan Gordon and his group have been developing vertical arrays of hydrophones to work out where animals are, echolocating cetaceans are within the water column. Jamie McCauley is talking about that tomorrow. In terms of what is the probability of a strike occurring, there's been a number of efforts to look at what is the chance of an animal moving through an area, if it doesn't do much about it, will actually make contact with a blade. And there's been a variety of different modelling techniques, encounter rate modelling and other varieties, to look at, are these issues in broad terms, is this something that's going to frequently occur, infrequently occur, or very rarely occur, to really get an idea of how big is this problem. And then there are the issues about, well, when an animal modifies its behaviour, how does it change those probabilities? And there's been a lot of effort, and there's going to be a whole session on in the Friday collision workshop discussing the techniques that are out there. But some of them will be looking at things like turbine noise, or what range can an animal detect a turbine, and therefore modify its behaviour. There's been some experiments, for example, Gordon Hastings is going to talk about some of this tomorrow, doing playbacks to look at how animals modify their distribution. And then there's been discussions of using things like sonar to look at close-range interactions. What about collisions? Do collisions actually occur? And I think this is one of the remaining gaps that's been least addressed, and the AMP is definitely going to help there. Yesterday there was discussions about using high-resolution sonar to look at turbine blades, optical cameras, accelerometers, strain gauges, microphones on blades. But I'd argue that at the moment we don't have the tool to get at to definitively answer whether an animal made contact with the turbine blade. We can get an idea if it went very close, but we don't yet know. And one of the things we need to think about is how big is the signal? If an animal does hit a turbine, how much bigger signal are we going to look for? What are we looking for in strain gauges? And the work by Peter Stansby and his group at the University of Manchester putting rubber models of marine mammals in flume tanks with turbines to look at the engineering side of a collision may help be informative for that. Finally, fourthly, what are the consequences of a collision occurring? And at the last EMA conference, Andrea Copping introduced Tom Carlson's work in the North Pacific, looking at what happens if a killer whale puts his nose into an open hydro device. Dave Thompson's got some funding to look at what are the physical consequences of a collision on pinnipeds. And then there's the pathologist's view. Andrew Brownlow's coming to Friday's workshop to talk about what signs would you look on a carcass or what information might you get. And finally, Mike Bennington, he's not here at this meeting, but he's been looking at if an animal was mortally wounded by a turbine, would it strand and which sort of beaches is likely to turn up on, local ones or ones far away. Okay. Finally, Are there mitigation options? One obvious mitigation is to avoid bad places, and marine mammals are in most places, so that's a tricky one, but I know one example of a site that hasn't gone ahead for these kinds of issues. Physical barriers. A while ago I'd have said, no, totally non-thing, but I got a phone call last week from a chap putting in a patent for a physical barrier in front of a turbine. I can pass on his details if anybody's interested. So not and maybe. Or you can reduce tip speed. And this is something that's only been discussed a tiny bit, and I don't know if we've gone through all of those discussions yet. Another one is to get smart, try and detect an animal, and then stop a turbine when it's done. MCT have done this with visual observers, moving into things like sonar. You could use passive acoustics to try and pick up the echolocation signals of an animal, or as I just said, with sonar to do that. So that's a possibility, but for things like basking sharks, maybe particularly difficult for silent animals, and certainly difficult for things like diving birds and things that are small. And then another one that frequently gets brought up is acoustic warning. Maybe you can add some sound to a turbine to make it aversive to animals. And I've just written a report for the Scottish Government on this, and when you actually get into it, it's not quite as simple an idea as might seem, because you're affecting the behaviour of the animal. That might be quite good if you try and keep it away from a single turbine. But what does it do when you've got an array of turbines? You don't really want an animal ping-ponging pinging into the next turbine, for example. And so, for example, if you had an array of turbines and you augmented them with some sort of acoustic mitigation, you might do a fantastic thing in keeping an animal out of an array, but you might have other effects like animals avoiding the entire area completely. So unintended consequences are possible. So the take-homes plenty of time. The take-homes from what I wanted to say were, firstly, mammal turbine collisions are a potential showstopper for the issue, and we're really at the brink of trying to finding out whether it is or not. And I'm very glad at the workshop yesterday there wasn't a discussion about should we be discussing it or not. We just got on with it. So there we go. At the moment, there are many aspects, many efforts to look at different aspects of this problem at the moment, all working together to try and illuminate how big an issue it really is. However, I think documenting actual strikes is a fundamental but under-progressed idea. I'm delighted to see the idea that Brian was just presenting. That's definitely going to get us somewhere. But I also think instrumenting blades and understanding what happens to give us an idea of how hard did an animal hit a blade, give us that information if it occurs at all. And finally, I think mitigation is an option, particularly things like sound aversion and so on, but only if there is a collision problem at all. I think we need to get that point before we start adding extra stimuli or issues to the marine environment. We need to understand if we've actually got something to fix. And thank you for your attention, and thank you, Oscar.
Thanks very much, Ben. We have a moment or two for questions, if anyone would like to ask anything. Digger.
Covered this. The documenting actual strikes thing sounds like a great idea. There are some lessons perhaps from onshore wind farms where there has been, by and large, no obligation to document strikes of eagles and kites and things. And as a consequence, although and individual developers have tended to keep it quiet, it gives them a bad name for that wind farm or whatever, that is only going to happen if it's a condition of the license to do the thing. And I'll just need to be aware that if there is a strikes happening, that there may be some people who wish to keep it quiet. So perhaps it's to everyone's benefit that we all know.
I agree.
Maybe we can follow that up. Is David in the room? David O'Sullivan? Yeah. What you put in license conditions for tidal turbines, do you have compulsory reporting of accidents?
What Digger just suggested is not in there just now, and we did discuss this yesterday actually. But I'll bring that back to the licensing team, and I think that is a condition that could be incorporated.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Ben.